The night everything fell apart started with a glass of Bordeaux and a conversation Isla Merritt was never supposed to understand. She was standing near the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Hargrove Hotel's rooftop terrace. 42 floors above downtown Chicago, the lake somewhere dark and vast beyond the skyline, holding her wine and pretending to admire the view while her husband worked the room. That was her role at these events. Stand beautifully. Smile when introduced. Don't talk too much about anything that matters. Colton Merritt was good at these things. Good at rooms. Good at making every person in one feel like the most important person in it. Isla had watched him do it for 3 years of marriage and still found herself occasionally amazed. The way you can be amazed by something you've also learned to be afraid of. He was across the terrace now with a man she recognized as Prentice Zhao, the Singapore-based fund manager, whose firm had been quietly circling Merritt Capital for months. The two of them were deep in conversation, leaning toward each other slightly, the body language of men who are deciding something. And then Colton's assistant, a precise young woman named Dana, who wore her hair in the same low bun every single day, materialized at Isla's elbow. Mrs. Merritt. Mr. Zhao has requested the meeting moved to a private table. Your husband asked me to let you know you're welcome to head home if you're tired. Welcome to head home. Isla smiled. I'm not tired. Thank you, Dana. Dana hesitated, just a fraction of a second, then nodded and moved away. Isla turned back to the window. She watched Colton guide Prentice Zhao toward a corner table separated from the rest of the terrace by a tall privacy screen of sculpted boxwood. She watched a third person rise from that table to greet them. A woman, tall, dark-haired, the kind of beautiful that announces itself. She watched her husband's hand settle briefly at the small of that woman's back as he pulled out her chair. Then Isla did something she'd been doing quietly, for months, without telling anyone. She drifted to the other side of the boxwood screen, stood near a heating lamp with her wine, and listened. Because Colton Merritt had spent their entire marriage assuming Isla's Mandarin was decorative. She'd studied it for 8 years, started in high school, continued through her undergraduate years at Northwestern, spent 14 months post-graduation doing nonprofit work in Chengdu. She was fluent, conversationally indistinguishable, according to every person she'd ever spoken to there. But she'd never mentioned it to Colton. Early in their relationship it simply hadn't come up, and then later she'd started to understand that there were things about her life it was safer for Colton not to know. Prentice Zhao, it turned out, preferred to negotiate in Mandarin when he didn't want to be understood. What she heard in the next 11 minutes changed everything. Isla had met Colton at a fundraising gala for a children's literacy organization, which, in retrospect, was exactly the kind of origin story designed to make a person feel guilty for ever doubting him. He'd been 34, recently featured in Crane's Chicago Business, building Merritt Capital into something impressive and fast. She'd been 27, fresh back from Chengdu, figuring out what came next. He was handsome in the way that reads as trustworthy, square jaw, easy laugh, the kind of face that photographs well at charity events. He had a way of listening that made you feel brilliant. He remembered details. He followed up. On their 4th date he'd told her, I've met a lot of impressive people, Isla. You're different. You don't need the room. She'd understood that as a compliment. She'd understand it differently, later as a preference. He liked that she didn't need the room because it meant he got all of it. They married after 14 months. She'd left her work with the nonprofit to help him build the foundation arm of Merritt Capital, which was how he'd framed it. I need someone I trust at the table. She'd believed it was a partnership. What she'd become, slowly, was a symbol, a function. The gracious wife at his side at every event, the one who remembered names, who sent handwritten thank you notes, who managed the household and the foundation calendar, and her own quiet disappointment with remarkable efficiency. She'd started noticing things in the 2nd year. Small things first. The way Colton's phone disappeared when she walked into a room. The business trips that extended themselves by a day or two without clear explanation. The woman she didn't know who appeared twice in the background of a hotel lobby in photos Colton had posted on LinkedIn. And then appeared again, not in the background. She hadn't said anything. Not because she was weak, because she'd learned, somewhere in that 2nd year, that Colton responded to direct confrontation by becoming very calm and very convincing and very focused on making you feel like you'd misunderstood. He was exceptional at it. By the time he was done you weren't sure what you'd seen. So Isla had started to watch instead, and to plan. She'd quietly retained an attorney, a woman named Evelyn Marsh at a downtown firm, someone Colton had never met and had no professional overlap with. She'd started learning. She'd sat with Evelyn for 2 hours on a Tuesday afternoon 4 months before the rooftop terrace, and asked questions, until she understood exactly what equitable distribution meant in Illinois, what a forensic accountant could find, and what documentation she would need. She'd started building a file, not because she was certain, but because she was beginning to understand that certainty in these situations rarely arrives before you need it. You build the structure while you still have access to it. By the night of the Hargrove Gala, Isla had been waiting, deliberately, strategically, and with a discipline that sometimes frightened her, for almost 5 months. Here is what she heard through the boxwood screen. Prentice Zhao asked Colton, in Mandarin, whether the Q3 numbers had been cleaned up yet. Colton said, in the easy, confident Mandarin of someone who'd learned it at a private language academy and kept it sharp with regular practice, that the restructuring was complete and the outside review wouldn't find anything problematic. Prentice asked about the co-investment structure, specifically about whether the fund vehicle in the Cayman account had been dissolved. Colton said it had been transferred, not dissolved, and that the new structure was cleaner. Prentice said that the Singapore investors would need 30 days to review the new documentation before committing. Colton said 30 days was fine. He needed 60 actually to finalize one more thing. Then Prentice said something that Isla replayed in her memory for the next 3 weeks with remarkable precision. He said, in the kind of offhand tone men use when they're not worried about being overheard, "Your wife, she doesn't know about any of this?" And Colton laughed. She recognized that laugh. Warm, a little indulgent, the laugh he used when a question struck him as almost too simple to require an answer. Isla, he said, she speaks about 40 words of Mandarin. She once used the wrong tone on a restaurant order and got pork when she wanted chicken. She has no idea. Isla finished her wine. She set the glass on a nearby tray with great care, the kind of care you take when your hands might not be entirely steady. She looked out at the Chicago skyline for a long moment. Then she went home. Colton came in around 1 in the morning. She heard him moving through the house, heard the soft sounds of a man who is trying to be quiet and isn't worried enough about it to really succeed. He didn't come into the bedroom immediately. She heard him in his home office for almost 20 minutes. She lay still in the dark and let herself feel it. The full weight of what she'd heard, the specific quality of his laugh when he said her name, the casual confidence of a man who has calculated exactly how much his wife knows and found the number satisfying. She has no idea. She'd been waiting for the right moment. The problem with waiting for the right moment is that sometimes you hear something that makes you want to move immediately. To stand up and walk into that office and lay it all out. Every piece of everything you've built over 5 months, and watch his face change. She didn't do that. She breathed. She thought about Evelyn Marsh. She thought about what Evelyn had told her. The timing of when you move matters as much as what you have. Don't move before you have everything you need and nowhere near before you're ready. She thought about the Cayman account, about the fund vehicle transferred, not dissolved, about 30 days, about 60. She understood something that night with a clarity that felt almost cold. Colton was in the middle of a transaction, a significant one, and the financial reality of Merit Capital right now, its valuation, its structure, its position, would look very different in 60 days than it did tonight. She needed to understand exactly how different. She had time, not unlimited time, but enough. She would use it. The forensic accountant's name was Stuart Pack. Evelyn had recommended him. He was quiet, meticulous, and had spent 11 years in the forensic division of a major accounting firm before going private. He wore the same brand of reading glasses that Isla's grandfather had worn, which made her trust him in a way she understood was irrational, but didn't bother to adjust. She met him on a Wednesday morning at Evelyn's office. She brought everything she had. 3 years of joint tax filings she'd photographed from the home filing cabinet. 2 years of bank statements from the joint account, records from the foundation, and a summary she'd typed herself of everything she'd heard on the terrace. Stuart listened without interrupting. Then he looked at the summary for a long moment, looked at her and said, "How certain are you about what you heard?" "I've spoken Mandarin for 8 years," Isla said. "I'm certain." He nodded once. "Then we have a place to start." What Stuart found over the following 6 weeks, moving through the Merit Capital financial architecture, with the focused attention of a man removing debris from a delicate mechanism, was a structure that had been designed to be invisible from most angles. There were 3 entities Isla hadn't known existed. A Delaware LLC that appeared to hold intellectual property licensing revenue, a Cayman-registered investment vehicle, through which a portion of Merit Capital's high-net-worth client funds had been commingled with Colton's personal accounts over a period of roughly 4 years, and a management fee arrangement between Merit Capital and a consulting firm that Stuart determined with a kind of quiet professional satisfaction, had no employees, no office, and no function other than to move money. The consulting firm, Isla looked it up one evening after Stewart mentioned it, was registered to an address in Wilmington, Delaware, that was also the registered address of approximately 1,200 other shell companies. Its listed contact was a registered agent service. Its single officer, listed on the state filing, was a name Isla didn't recognize. She ran the name through a search. The result came back to a woman, the same tall dark-haired woman Isla had watched her husband seat at the private table on the rooftop terrace of the Hargrove Hotel. Her name was Celestine Varro. She was 31. She had a background in investment management, which explained the professional overlap. She also had a social media presence that told Isla, in the careful, specific way that social media tells you things, that she had been present at several of the same conferences and events as Colton over the past 2.5 years. Always in the background of someone else's photo, always just at the edge of the frame. Isla sat with this for a long evening. She made tea. She let herself feel the shape of what this was, not just the financial irregularities, not just the legal exposure, but the specific reality of a woman who had been running a company that existed only on paper, while also apparently existing very much in her husband's real life. She felt something that surprised her by being less like devastation and more like recognition. Like she'd been looking at a blurry photograph for a long time and someone had finally handed her the right glasses. She sent Evelyn everything Stewart had found. Evelyn's response came the next morning, at 7:42, in the form of a calendar invitation for a meeting that afternoon. Evelyn Marsh was a compact woman in her mid-50s, who wore her gray hair short and her expressions neutral in a way that Isla had come to find deeply reassuring. She'd handled high-asset divorce cases in Chicago for 23 years. She had the manner of someone who has heard most things and been surprised by very few of them. She spent 40 minutes reviewing Stewart's summary. Then she set it down and looked at Isla. "This is significant exposure," she said, "for him, both civil and potentially regulatory, depending on how the fund structures shake out. I know. You understand that once this becomes part of a filing, it becomes a matter of record, which creates its own chain of events." "I understand." Evelyn was quiet for a moment. "You've been very patient." "I needed to understand what I actually had," Isla said. "I didn't want to move on a feeling." Evelyn almost smiled. It was a small expression, controlled, but it was there. "All right, here's where we are." What Evelyn explained was this: the commingling of client funds with personal accounts, if confirmed by regulatory review, would expose Merit Capital to significant SEC scrutiny. The management fee structure, paying a shell company controlled by a personal associate, could constitute a breach of fiduciary duty to the fund's investors. The Cayman vehicle, depending on how it had been reported or not reported, created its own set of potential issues. None of this was Isla's problem, legally. She was not an officer of Merit Capital. She was not a signatory on the problematic entities. What it was, from a divorce proceeding standpoint, was leverage. Substantial leverage. Because Colton's ability to negotiate from a position of strength depended entirely on Merit Capital remaining what it appeared to be. And it appeared that way only as long as no one looked too closely at the structures underneath. "We file," Evelyn said, "and we file with this as the context of the asset picture. The other side will need to make a calculation about what they want disclosed and what they'd prefer to resolve quietly." Isla looked at the window. Outside, Michigan Avenue was doing its ordinary afternoon thing, indifferent and bright. "What do I need to do?" she asked. "Nothing yet," Evelyn said. "I need 2 more weeks to prepare the filing. You need to continue doing exactly what you've been doing." "Going to his events," Isla said. "Going to his events," Evelyn confirmed, smiling, not alerting him in any way. The 2 weeks were the strangest of Isla's life. She attended a dinner at the Four Seasons, where Colton gave a brief talk about the future of alternative investment strategies, and received a sustained, appreciative applause. She stood near the back and watched him and thought about Delaware shell companies, and the registered agent in Wilmington, and a woman named Celestine Varro, whose business, on paper, did not exist. She went to a Sunday brunch at the home of one of Colton's longest-standing clients, a silver-haired man named Barker, who had made his money in logistics and seemed to genuinely like Colton, and she smiled through 2 hours of conversation and accepted a second mimosa and did not say what she knew. She slept beside her husband every night, and in the morning made coffee and checked her phone in the kitchen while he showered, and she did not, even once, give him any reason to change the assessment he'd made on that rooftop. She has no idea. She observes this as its own kind of skill, the discipline of appearances, the patience required to let a person remain completely wrong about you for exactly as long as it serves your purpose. She thought sometimes about what she would have done if she'd confronted him that night at the Hargrove. If she'd walked around the boxwood screen and said, in perfectly clear Mandarin, "I heard every word." She imagined the shock on his face. The way it would have rearranged itself almost immediately into that calm, careful expression. The conversation that would have followed, in which he would have explained and reframed, and walked her back until she was no longer certain of what she'd heard. She was glad she hadn't done it. Evelyn filed on a Thursday. Colton was in a meeting at the Merit Capital offices on Wacker Drive when his phone started ringing. He let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again. Then Dana appeared at the conference room door with the specific expression of someone delivering news they did not request to carry. Isla knew the timeline of that afternoon, because his attorney called Evelyn within the hour. She was at home when it happened. She was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and a book she wasn't reading. Because she'd thought she'd want something to do with her hands, and it turned out she didn't particularly need it. She was calm, not the brittle calm of someone suppressing something, but something deeper and stranger. The calm of a person who has made every decision they needed to make and carried them correctly, and now just has to wait for the sequence to play out. Colton came home at 6:45. She heard the front door, heard his keys on the entry table, heard the particular quality of silence that a person creates when they're trying to decide how to enter a room. He appeared in the kitchen doorway. He looked, for the first time in the 3 years she had known him, genuinely uncertain. His face was doing several things at once, none of them the expressions she was used to. "Isla," he said. She looked up from her book. "Hi." A long pause. He was recalibrating. She could almost watch it happen. "We need to talk," he said. "I know," she said. "Evelyn said your attorney would be in touch to schedule." Something shifted in his expression. The recalibrating slowed. He was looking at her differently now. Trying to map the version of her he thought he'd known onto the person sitting at his kitchen table, who had, apparently, retained an attorney months ago, and built something comprehensive enough that his own lawyers had called him out of a meeting. "How long have you been planning this?" he asked. His voice was careful, controlled, but not as controlled as usual. Isla considered the question. "I've been paying attention for a long time," she said. The planning came later. He sat down across from her, slowly, the way you sit when you're not sure the chair will hold. "The financial documents they referenced. Stuart Pack prepared the analysis," she said. "Evelyn has the full report." He went quiet. She watched the information settle into him, the specific gravity of realizing that someone you believed was standing, still had in fact, been moving in a different direction entirely for a very long time. "The Cayman vehicle," she said not unkindly. "The consulting arrangement. I imagine those are the things your attorneys are most concerned about right now." He looked at her. For a moment she saw something under the surface of his usual composure that she hadn't seen before. Something that might have been, in another person, something close to awe, but it crossed his face quickly and was replaced by the expression she recognized, the calm, deliberate focus of a man deciding what posture to take next. "This doesn't have to be adversarial," he said. "It doesn't," she agreed. "That'll depend on the conversation between our attorneys." He seemed to want to say something else. She watched him consider and discard several things. Finally, "You've been going to every event," smiling. "For months." "Yes," she said simply. "And you understood." He stopped. Something occurred to him. She watched it move across his face. "The rooftop, at the Hargrove." She didn't answer. He closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them he said very quietly, "You speak Mandarin." 8 years, Isla said. "I once used the wrong tone on a restaurant order and got pork when I wanted chicken. I've improved since then." The settlement took 4 months. It was not a comfortable 4 months for Merit Capital, which found itself in several simultaneous conversations with external counsel that had nothing to do with Isla, and everything to do with the fund structures that Stewart's analysis had illuminated. Prentice Zhao's firm declined to proceed with the co-investment. 3 other institutional partners requested independent audits. Isla's settlement was negotiated in that context, which meant that Colton's attorneys were trying to move quickly, discreetly, and with as little additional documentation entering the public record as possible. Which meant that their offers moved in a direction that Evelyn described, at one point, as motivated. Celestine Varro's name appeared in the process, not prominently. The particulars of personal conduct weren't the central issue, given the financial picture. But she appeared. The consulting arrangement was documented, its nature was documented. Isla didn't take satisfaction in that, exactly. She took satisfaction in something different. In the fact that she'd understood what she was dealing with before she was in a position where she had to rely on anyone's mercy. She'd built something solid before she needed it. She'd made her decisions from a place of knowledge rather than reaction. The morning the settlement was finalized, Isla sat in Evelyn's conference room and signed her name 11 times. Evelyn's paralegal notarized each page. When it was done, Evelyn handed her a copy, and Isla put it in her bag and thanked everyone in the room by name. Outside, it was March. Chicago in March is an argument about whether spring is coming, the kind of argument that hasn't been decided yet. The wind off the lake was significant and cold, and she walked into it without hunching, because she'd grown up in this city and she knew how to walk into weather. 6 months later, Isla took a position with a nonprofit focused on financial literacy education for women in career transition. It wasn't the highest status job she'd been offered in the months since the settlement. It was the one she wanted. She moved into an apartment in Lincoln Park that was smaller than the house on the Gold Coast, and had a kitchen with white cabinets and windows that faced east. And every morning for the rest of that year she drank her coffee standing at those windows, watching the sky do its early business, and felt something she'd forgotten was available to her. She'd spent a long time being what a room required, what a marriage required, being small in the right ways and decorative and carefully, patiently not a problem. She didn't miss it. There were still moments when she thought about that terrace, the boxwood screen, the heating lamp, the particular quality of Colton's voice when he said her name like a closed case. Isla? She has no idea. The confidence of a man who has decided exactly how much you know and is satisfied with the number. She thought about the restaurant story. The wrong tone on the wrong syllable and the pork that arrived when she'd wanted chicken. She'd actually found it funny at the time. She'd laughed about it with the cook, a middle-aged woman named Fang, who'd been charmed by the error and brought her both dishes. She thought about all the conversations she'd understood across 3 years of marriage that Colton had assumed she hadn't. The dinners. The phone calls she'd been adjacent to. The Hargrove Terrace. She thought about how completely, confidently, and at what cost a person can be wrong about someone who's been standing next to them the whole time. The city kept doing what cities do. Isla Merritt, soon to be Isla Pemberton, her mother's maiden name, which she was reclaiming, kept doing what she'd always done, which was pay attention. She was very good at it. It turned out that counted for something. It turned out it counted for quite a lot.